Austin, Texas. My daughter got $35 million dollars and threw me out of my own home. 3 days later, she'd be begging for my help. But that night, all I could smell was mesquite smoke and a fresh coat of paint covering my name. I'm Tom Alvarez, 68, the hands behind a backyard recipe that grew into Alvarez Kitchen Co. For 40 years, I tended fires the way some men tend fortunes, slow, steady, stubborn. I taught my daughter Rachel to read a thermometer like a compass and to trust the shine on a glaze more than any spreadsheet. We bottled small, sold out fast, and kept our promises clean labels, clean books, clean hands. Then a food conglomerate called. They wanted my name, my story, my sauce neatly poured into national distribution. The papers said the number like it was a weather report, $35 million, dollars, $20 million up front, $15 million in an earnout if integration milestones hit, and brand continuity stayed on message. I signed in a Navy conference room that didn't smell like anything. Rachel squeezed my hand. We did it, Dad. We did, until we didn't. The night it broke, Rachel scheduled a live stream town hall with staff, vendors, and community partners. Someone had strung twinkle lights across the old garage, my first bottling room, and parked a sleek camera on a tripod where my mop bucket used to sit. The HOA president stood near the hedges like a bouncer at a quiet club. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, curious. A representative from the buyer navy blazer, brighter smile hovered by the catering table. My pit sat cold behind them, a retired soldier. Rachel stepped into the light in a crisp red blazer that matched the label I designed on my kitchen table. The new logo glowed on a screen behind her, Alvarez Kitchen Co., now with a tiny R that somehow looked like a padlock. She smiled into the lens. Tonight we celebrate our exit at 35 million. This is a new era. She hit her marks like a metronome, growth, national rollout, co-manufacturers, out-of-state retail partners coast to coast. The chat on the screen bubbled hearts and clapping hands. Then her tone shifted smooth as a blade finding the seam of a brisket. And to protect our brand image going forward, we will be streamlining roles. I felt 100 eyes move like a school of fish. Rachel didn't look at me. She looked through the camera. As of tonight, Thomas Alvarez will have no operational role and no presence at the facility. Our insurance and compliance partners agree we cannot risk legacy processes that don't meet current standards. There it was, clean, cold corporate. A daughter turning a father into a liability with 2 sentences and a smile. I tried to step forward, but she lifted a hand and a young PR manager put a gentle palm on my sleeve, like I was a microphone feeding back. Dad, Rachel said, still smiling at the lens, we're grateful for the origin story, but we need professional distance. Effective immediately, the garage workshop is closed to you, and you'll vacate the main house. We have a relocation stipend arranged. Murmurs. A neighbor's whisper carried like a siren. The HOA president cleared his throat, consulted a clipboard, and mumbled something about use covenants and commercial activity. The buyer's rep nodded solemnly the way people nod at funerals. I laughed just once. It sounded like a cough. Rach, I said, keeping my voice low because the mic on her lapel would make any word of mine sound like thunder. This is our home. Your mother planted those roses. I seasoned those rafters with smoke and prayer. She finally met my eyes. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl who learned to tell doneness by touch. Then the CFO and my son-in-law's voice slipped out of her mouth. Thomas has discussed the company cannot be associated with uncontrolled environments. Your presence is a policy risk. Policy risk, liability, brand image, words like zip ties. Behind me, the camera operator zoomed. The red light stared back unblinking. Someone in the chat wrote, tough love. Protect the brand. Another legend. Time to retire, sir. I stood there framed by my own story while my daughter narrated me off stage. The HOA president stepped closer, kind but firm, the way a pastor might close a service that ran too long. Mr. Alvarez, per community rules, sustained commercial use of the garage is not permitted under the new ownership. There's also an occupancy clarification on file. He tapped the board. Primary residence of record belongs to the company trust now. The buyer's rep added the soft knife. Of course, we're committed to dignity and transition. Rachel has authorized a generous package. I stared past them at the walls I'd washed until the paint showed clean at the tape marks on the floor, where my first stainless table used to live, at the ghost of a grease shadow I never could fully lift. My hands remembered heat that wasn't there. Rachel kept the smile, but her eyes had the hard shine of tempered glass. Dad, let's make this graceful. You told me once that sauce picks up whatever's in the air. Pride turns everything bitter. And betrayal, I asked. The smile didn't crack. That's not the story we're telling. Neighbors shifted. Phones rose. The live stream chat flooded again with emoji that meant everything and nothing. A kid on a scooter coasted to the curb wide-eyed as if he'd wandered onto a stage. I walked to the workbench. It was bare. Even the blue tape with my handwriting batch 01 was gone. In its place sat a laminated sign, "No unauthorized personnel." I could argue. I could shout. I could turn the pit back on and let the flames say what I couldn't. But the camera was not my friend and the contract ink was still dark. So I did the one thing they didn't script. I took off my apron, the black one, with Alvarez stitched in white by my late wife's careful hands. I folded it once, then again edges true. I set it on the bench like a flag I refused to burn. "Congratulations," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "You bought a story. Be careful what you tell with it." I turned to the crowd neighbors, the HOA man, the buyer's rep, the camera with its little red lighthouse, and gave them a nod I used to give at the end of a long cook. Then I stepped out of the garage that smelled like fresh paint and nothing else. On the sidewalk, the night air tasted different. No smoke, no sugar, just the mineral breath of a city that keeps its own heat. I could hear Rachel behind me still speaking in that calm, ascending cadence. Growth, vision, safety, compliance, as if words could season a soul. A hand brushed my sleeve. Mrs. Green from next door, who'd brought me jars when I was testing batches, looked at me with wet eyes. "Tom," she whispered. "You okay?" I found a smile I didn't feel. "I've seen tougher fires," the HOA president called after me, careful, apologetic. "Sir, there's a timeline on the vacate notice. We can coordinate with you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I nodded without looking back. At the end of the driveway, I paused. The twinkle lights blinked over my empty workroom, turning everything soft that did not deserve to be soft. The camera swung to catch my exit, hungry for closure. I raised my hand not to wave, but to mark the moment in the only way I could. Then I put my head down and walked toward the street where my old pickup waited with a cooler and a box of paper towels that had outlived a business. $35 million. 20 now. 15 later if the story stayed sweet. Behind me, the red light kept winking. Ahead of me, Austin hummed indifferent. I didn't know yet that in 3 days at 7:00 p.m., sharp the same people who wrote me out would be calling me back in. I only knew that smoke sticks to what it loves. And tonight it clung to me. I slept in the cab of my pickup with the apron on my chest like a folded flag. The garage lights burned all night. The camera crew finally packed up, but the red glow of that little tally light stayed in my head. It blinked whenever I closed my eyes. At dawn, Austin stretched and yawned. Cicadas wound down. Lawn sprinklers clicked alive. I swung my legs to the gravel and stood until my back settled. I'm 68, but fire keeps a man limber. Smoke teaches you to move slow and sure. I walked the side yard to the kitchen door, the one my wife used to leave open on Sundays. The keypad chirped. Same code as always. Inside the house smelled wrong lemon cleaner, where oak and pepper should be. Somebody had staged my life. On the dining table sat a tidy stack, a manila envelope, a branded folder, a key on a new ring that wasn't mine. The envelope had my name in a font we never used. The folder said Transition Materials. I touched the letters the way I test a brisket bark. They didn't give. The letter on top was from the HOA, polite as a sheriff at a picnic. Dear Mr. Alvarez, per recorded changes to title the structure formerly used as a workshop is subject to Covenant C7. Please coordinate vacate within 72 hours to remain in good standing. Good standing. I laughed under my breath. My feet were still on the floorboards my wife chose. My standing felt fine. Behind that, a printout with the company logo and a signature line that looked like a threat dressed for church. Relocation stipend, acknowledgement and mutual release. $10,000 to pack up my life on the condition I stop calling myself founder, stop stepping on the property, uninvited stop saying the word ours. I read each clause slow. Words like non-disparagement indemnity, no future claims. They tasted like cold grease. My phone buzzed. A text from a number labeled Evan H. We'd never saved each other's contacts. He was my son-in-law, the CFO, who wore slim suits and counted with both hands and a laptop. Tom, please sign release by noon. Insurance is already on edge, re-legacy exposure. Let's keep this clean. I typed and deleted. Typed again. Evan, things here were clean before you had a spreadsheet. Dots bounced. We respect the history, but compliance is king. R will call you at 9. R. Rachel pared down to a letter the way they pared down my name. I set the phone face down and walked the hallway. On our wall, the family photos had been rehung along a straighter line. My wife's frame was a fraction lower than the others, as if the house had shrugged. I lifted it into my hands. Her smile was small and sure, the kind you save for the punchline you know is coming. In the pantry, my first labels sat in a crate like old hymnals. The corners curled from heat. I ran my thumb over a smear of sauce that had slipped under the varnish years ago. My daughter once pressed her tiny palm into a puddle just like that and stamped the back of a cabinet door. I left it there on purpose. The print was still faintly visible, a ghost of a girl who believed mess meant joy. I took the crate, the apron, a jar of the last batch I'd bottled alone, and the recipe book. Not the glossy binder, not the corporate SOP, the logbook with coffee rings and smoke in its spine, the one my wife stitched together with butcher's twine when mine fell apart. Hey, CCP logs, temps, timestamps, initials? My initials. I didn't know yet that those pages would matter more than any press release. I only knew they felt like truth in a world that had switched to pretty lies. At 9, the phone chimed through the kitchen speaker. Rachel's voice filled our house bright and steady. Hi, Dad. I'm looping in Amy from Comms and Frank from Risk. We want to make sure you're supported. Supported! The word had splinters. I found your paperwork, I said. Great. The relocation stipend is generous. The release protects all of us. It's standard. Standard for strangers, I said. We're not strangers. Silence then, the click of a smile I could hear. We're a brand now, Dad. Brands can't be sentimental about risk. Frank came on warm and professional. Thomas, you're a legend. But legends need guardrails. Our insurer flagged legacy practices. Even if your process is perfect, perceived exposure is exposure. Amy added the sugar. We'll write a beautiful founder story for the site. Timeless, grateful, forward-looking. We'd love to use your old photos. You already did, I said, and looked at the empty nail where my wife's apron used to hang. Please sign by noon, Rachel said. It helps us separate family and company. Healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries. Like yellow tape around a memory. Rach, I said, letting the words sit like a cast iron lid, is this really about safety? It is, she said quickly. Too quickly. And optics. Dad, TikTok doesn't forgive. A single clip of anything unvetted could tank us. I looked at the garden through the window. The rosemary bush my wife planted had overrun its bed, stubborn and fragrant, taking up space it wasn't allotted. It made me smile. I won't sign today, I said. Not while that paper says I can't call myself what I am. What are you? Rachel asked soft. A test disguised as a question. Your father, I said, and the man who wrote the book you're selling. The line thinned. Please don't make this messy. It already is. After we hung up, I packed a single room, a box of cookbooks, a shoebox of ticket stubs from food festivals, back when a win was a ribbon and a handshake, not a metric slide. The Polaroid of Rachel on a milk crate age 10, holding a sauce pot with both hands proud and fierce. By noon, a courier left a second envelope at the door. This one had a heavier feel, like a plate before a feast. Notice of access change. Access cards deactivated at 5 p.m. Alarm code to be changed. Keys to be surrendered to property manager. Items not removed within 72 hours to be disposed of per policy. A sticky note in neat block letters. Dad, please don't be difficult. This helps everyone. R. I took a photo of the note and slipped it between the pages of the logbook. Proof that love can sound like management. On my way out, I found the boy from last night, the scooter kid, sitting on our curb helmet, askew looking at the garage like it might redeliver magic if he stared hard enough. You closing Mr. Alvarez? He asked. Not the kitchen in here, I said, tapping my chest. That one stays open. He grinned, gap-toothed. Your sauce is in my lunch every day. That's a fine lunch. He looked past me at the garage. My mom says grown-ups ruin everything when money shows up. Sometimes, I said, sometimes money shows what's already ruined. He rolled this around like a marble and nodded even though it wasn't a toy he should play with. At 4:59, I stood in the doorway to the garage one last time and watched the little screen on the alarm. 4:59. 5:00. The keypad flashed, then went dark. My code died with a chirp. I set the house key on the counter the way you leave one for a pet sitter you shouldn't trust. I kept the recipe book, the apron, and the jar in a canvas bag my wife used to carry to the farmer's market. On my way to the truck, a white SUV eased to the curb. Evan stepped out in a navy suit that matched his messages. He offered a handshake he didn't mean. Tom. Evan. He looked past me at the kitchen, then at the bag on my shoulder. Rachel asked me to make this smooth. Like cornstarch in cold water, I said. He blinked. I don't cook. I know. He held out a small box with the company logo. Inside lay a new key on a new ring and a card with a number. Temporary housing courtesy of the buyer. 2 weeks at the Marriott. Breakfast included. A hotel key where my house key used to be. I didn't take it. Keep it, I said. Give breakfast to someone hungrier. He shifted a tell he didn't know he had. Our insurer wants a clean perimeter. Please don't post anything inflammatory. I don't post, I said. I cook. He tried again, soften. Rachel is under pressure. National rollout isn't a joke. She needs room. I gave her a kitchen, Evan. That's all the room a person needs. He tucked the box back into his pocket, disappointed I hadn't played his part. We'll circle back Monday. Circle all you want, I said. I'll be where I've always been. Which is where I looked at the garage, the house, the rosemary, the kid on the scooter, the sky turning Texas pink, where the heat is honest. That night I parked behind the church that used to buy our sauce for the fall fair. The pastor left the outside outlet hot for folks who needed to charge a phone and not answer questions. I cracked the jar and dabbed a finger to my tongue. Smoky, sweet, vinegar with a spine. It tasted like a promise you make to yourself where nobody can hear it. I folded the apron again edge to edge and said out loud to the dashboard and the cicadas and the God who loves stubborn men, I won't be erased. 3 days later at 7 in the evening, the phone would ring with the kind of panic you can hear through a smile. But for now, I closed my eyes and let the smoke cling. By Saturday morning, the neighborhood already knew. Phones don't sleep and neither do whispers. Clips from the live stream had been chopped, trimmed, captioned, and uploaded to Facebook groups, TikTok feeds, and even the church's group chat. A man spending his twilight years being shoved aside by his own daughter. It was the kind of story folks loved to pass around before breakfast. I stood in line at the corner cafe, baseball cap pulled low, listening to the murmurs ripple behind me. That was him, right, the sauce guy. Rachel was professional. You've got to modernize. Still, after everything he built, I took my coffee to go. No appetite for biscuits when your name's being diced like onions on every corner. Back at the pickup, I pulled out my phone. Messages stacked like cordwood. Some old friends wrote with sympathy. Saw the video praying for you, brother. Others with warning, don't comment. It'll only add fuel. And some with sharp edges. Maybe Rachel's right. Time to let go. I logged into the church Facebook group, a place where recipes usually got more traction than politics. My fingers hovered, then started moving. 40 years I've tended this fire, I wrote. I taught my daughter Rachel everything I knew. If the world believes I am a risk instead of a resource, so be it. But I want it written down, the sauce you taste in every bottle is mine. It came from this heart and these hands. I hit post. Within minutes, comments poured in. Thumbs up, prayer hands, hearts. Old choir friends chimed in. Former employees wrote, couldn't have asked for a better boss. A deacon posted, legacy deserves respect. For a moment, I felt the warm glow of a campfire crowd. Until Rachel struck the match. She or her PR crew, I couldn't tell which, uploaded a clip. Grainy phone footage from 6 years ago at a state fair booth. It caught me red-faced snapping at a young helper who'd dropped a tray of ribs. My words sharp, my voice raised. They spliced in captions, verbal abuse, toxic environment, not safe. On the timeline, it looked damning. The comments shifted. Explains a lot. Guess he's not the saint they painted. Rachel protecting the brand. My heart sank. I remembered that day clear as smoke. The helper was my nephew, 16 and nervous. He'd laughed later, called it Uncle Tom's barbecue meltdown. We'd hugged before the sun went down. But video doesn't remember hugs. By noon, a senior center that had been planning to hire me as a food safety consultant emailed a curt note. In light of recent developments, we are suspending partnership discussions. I sat in the cab phone, buzzing with every fresh opinion. Neighbors passed my truck, some nodding, some avoiding eye contact. The apron on the seat beside me seemed heavier than cloth. Rachel had found a way to turn even my temper into a weapon. Politeness as a blade. "Keep quiet, Dad." Her voice echoed from last night. "Don't embarrass the family," I whispered into the empty cab, tasting bitterness on my tongue. They think silence is dignity, but silence is just smoke choking the fire. And the fire in me wasn't out yet. Sunday broke hot and cloudless, the kind of Texas day where shade feels like water. I parked outside the storage unit where I'd kept odds and ends after Rachel remodeled the house. Boxes stacked like forgotten years, dust on everything but the padlock. Inside I found it. A beat-up binder wrapped in butcher paper, smelling faintly of vinegar and oak. My HACCP logbook, the ledger that proved every batch of Alvarez sauce had passed federal eyes. Signatures, stamps, thermometer readings. Not corporate PowerPoints, but the ink of real inspectors who'd walked my floor and nodded at my fire. I set the binder on the tailgate and flipped through. Page after page of my handwriting, batch 214, 3:02 p.m., 187 degree, hold sign TA. Each note a breadcrumb trail leading straight back to me. Proof that I wasn't just some old man with memories, I was the process itself. My pulse quickened. If the buyer needed proof of origin, this was it. The earn-out clause, the brand's safety guarantees, none of it held water without me. My hands wrote this book, not Rachel's, not Evan's. I called the corporate office, asked for the compliance desk. A young voice answered, careful and clipped. "This is Tom Alvarez, founder. I've got the original HACCP logs, FDA signatures. You'll want to see them." A pause, keys clattering. "Sir, we can't discuss operational matters with non-employees. Please direct any correspondence through your daughter or the CFO." "I'm not a non-anybody," I said, heat rising. "This book is the backbone of your food safety file." Another pause, the voice lowered. "If you email anything proprietary outside approved channels, you may be in breach of confidentiality. Do you want me to note that in the system?" Click. "Call over." By evening, Evan called directly, his voice wrapped in legal jargon. "Tom, you're skirting a non-disclosure. Any attempt to distribute those documents will trigger litigation. Friendly warning." "Friendly like foreclosure," I muttered. "Look, we respect what you did, but the company's future can't hinge on old notebooks. Hand them to Rachel. Quietly. She'll make sure you're thanked appropriately." Appropriately. I closed the binder with a snap. "They're not old notebooks," I said. "They're the fireproof box. And you're not locking me out of my own legacy?" Silence stretched. Then Evan's tone sharpened. "Careful, Tom. Courts don't care about sentiment. They care about contracts." I hung up before he could finish. Night settled. Crickets buzzed. I sat on the tailgate ledger, heavy in my lap, apron folded by my side. For the first time since Rachel's announcement, I felt steady. Not safe, but steady. They wanted me silent. They wanted me erased. But this book was louder than any live stream, and I knew sooner or later they'd have to come to me. Monday morning, I drove to the church parking lot again, ledger tucked under my arm like a hymnal. Word had spread wider than I thought. Old friends approached me in twos and threes, careful, as if touching a man in the middle of a storm might burn them. "Tom," said Brother Dennis, gripping my hand too tight. "We've seen the posts, folks talking both ways. But we know who taught half this town what real barbecue tastes like. Others weren't as gentle. A woman I'd once hired for summer bottling leaned close. Maybe Rachel's right. Things change. Best not stir up trouble." Trouble. That word had started following me like a stray dog. By noon, a local reporter called. Young voice, eager. "Mr. Alvarez, sources say Alvarez Kitchen Co. May be facing complaints about product consistency. Care to comment? Complaints?" My gut tightened. What kind customers online claiming allergic reactions? We've requested statements from corporate, but haven't heard back. I said nothing, but the flame inside me hissed. My recipe never caused harm. If people were hurting, it was from shortcuts, substitutions, cost-saving swaps. Not my way. That evening, I drove past the grocery store on 12th Street. There stacked high were jars with my face sketched into the label. A teenager scanned one at the register and smirked. Mom, this? The sauce from that drama guy? That's what I was now. I went home, if you could call the cab of a pickup and a borrowed couch home, and set the ledger on the table. I thumbed the pages, each line proof of integrity. But outside, the wind carried whispers that Tom Alvarez was reckless, unsafe, bitter. The flame in my chest whispered louder. They can twist my past. They can forge a future. But they cannot rewrite the fire itself. And as the night deepened, I made a vow I hadn't spoken since burying my wife. I will not let my name be ash. Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, tags, notifications, friends telling me to stay off the internet, which of course only made me open it faster. At the top of my feed was a video Rachel's team had released. Sleek graphics, upbeat music. The headline, Alvarez Kitchen Co. commits to safety and respect. Then came the dagger. A clip of me years ago slamming a sauce pot onto a counter shouting, "You're gonna ruin the whole batch." My face red, my voice sharp. They looped it twice for effect, then cut to Rachel's calm smile. We believe in a respectful workplace. We're building a future where safety and dignity are non-negotiable. The comments flared like grease fire. Yikes, glad she took over. No wonder insurance got nervous. Old school, old toxic. I closed the app, but the damage clung like smoke. Later that afternoon, Pastor Jim found me behind the church tinkering with my old smoker. He laid a hand on my shoulder. "Tom, folks are talking. That video, it's ugly. But I remember the man who donated half his winnings from the fair to keep our food pantry alive." I swallowed hard. "Rachel's painting me a monster," he nodded slowly. "Maybe so, but truth has a way of seeping out like hickory through a lid. You just keep your fire steady." I wished I believed it was that simple. By evening, the senior center director called, his voice stiff, rehearsed. "Mr. Alvarez, in light of circulating media, will be suspending your consultant contract indefinitely." Click. Gone. I sat alone on the church steps, apron folded beside me, ledger heavy in my lap. Rachel's words echoed, "Don't embarrass the family." But the truth burned hotter than her polished lies. They'd weaponized my worst moment and dressed it as the whole story. I looked up at the darkening sky and muttered to no one in particular, "They want me quiet, but a fire that's banked still smolders, and smoldering coals can light again." Wednesday, the heat in Austin pressed down like a hand on the back of my neck. I drove to the small storage locker where I'd stashed the things Rachel hadn't bothered to catalog. Old aprons, dented pans, recipe drafts on yellow pads, dust thick enough to choke a memory. In the back corner sat a fireproof box, one my wife insisted we buy after a neighbor's garage caught flame 20 years back. I pried it open. Inside, neatly bound, was the original recipe logbook, every ratio, every adjustment, every FDA inspection signature. Not glossy binders, not lawyered contracts. My handwriting and the initials of inspectors who shook my hand after each batch. Page after page, proof that the sauce wasn't just folklore. It was documented, certified, legal. Ownership wasn't a story, it was ink on government paper. I laid the ledger on the tailgate of my truck, running my finger along the seal of the FDA letterhead. My wife's neat handwriting appeared in margins too. Notes like, "Add more smoke, trust your nose." She was still speaking to me from those pages. That afternoon, I drove to corporate headquarters, binder under my arm. A receptionist smiled too sweetly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I've got something more important. The proof of where this company came from." Her eyes flickered toward a glass office where Evan stood crisp in his suit phone to his ear. Minutes later, he strode over, smile thin as fishing line. "Tom," he said, low and controlled. "You shouldn't be here." I set the binder on the counter. "This is the original HACCP log. FDA signatures. It proves chain of custody. It proves I'm not a risk. I'm the reason your brand exists. Evan didn't touch it. He leaned closer, voice sharp enough to cut paper. Do you realize what you're holding proprietary data? If you so much as email a single page, you'll violate your NDA. That means injunctions, lawsuits, frozen accounts. Do you want that? Tom, I felt the eyes of the receptionist, the guard by the door, even the people in the lobby pretending not to listen. They already erased me, I said. Now you want me gagged too. Evan gave me that CFO smile, polished, practiced. Sign the release, hand over the binder, and we can all walk away quietly. You don't, and we'll bury you under paper heavier than this box. I stared at him. My hands shook, not from fear but fury. This isn't your story to bury. I picked up the binder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out. The guard moved like he might block me, but Evan waved him off. He didn't want a scene in the lobby. Out in the parking lot, heat waves shimmered off the asphalt. I leaned against my truck binder, pressed to my chest. They wanted to muzzle me with contracts, but I had something stronger than paper. I had the fire, the truth, and the recipe itself. Thursday morning, the phone buzzed before sunrise. Not friends this time, reporters. Local outlets, one even from Houston. Mr. Alvarez customers are reporting allergic reactions from Alvarez Kitchen Co sauce. Do you have comment? I sat up on the church cot, heart thudding. Allergic reactions. My recipe had never once failed inspection. 40 years clean. By the time I brewed coffee on the church's hot plate, the internet was already boiling. Yelp reviews, flashing red stars. Opened a new jar, broke out in hives. Son's throat swelled after one bite. Label says gluten-free, but my doctor disagrees. And TikTok, the cruel stage, was flooded with clips of young people filming half-empty jars showing rashes, coughing, swearing they'd been poisoned by Alvarez sauce. Corporate issued a polished statement by noon. We take consumer safety seriously. We are conducting an internal review of our updated production process. Updated production process. There it was. Not my fire, not my hands. A factory line somewhere out of state saving pennies by shaving corners. Neighbors stopped me outside the grocery store, eyes wide, whispers sharp. Tom, you hearing about this? Folks say your sauce is hurting kids. I felt the words like a knife in my ribs. Not my sauce, I growled. But the label didn't care whose hands had stirred it. My name was stamped right there. By evening, a reporter left a voicemail. Mr. Alvarez, would you be willing to confirm whether the original safety logs still exist? The company hasn't provided them. I looked at the binder resting on my passenger seat. Every page proof, every signature a shield. My daughter wanted me erased. Evan wanted me gagged. But now the company itself was cracking under its own shortcuts. The smoke had escaped the pit. And when smoke rolls, people start looking for the fire. I whispered to the empty cab, to the jar of sauce I still carried like a relic. They'll come knocking. And this time, they'll need me more than I need them. Friday dawned with sirens in my head. Not real ones, but the kind you hear when trouble's circling close. The news cycle had turned ugly overnight. Local BBQ darling faces, safety scandal. Anchors spoke my name with the same solemn tone they used for hurricanes. By mid-morning, my phone rang. A number from the buyer's headquarters. I let it buzz twice before answering. Mr. Alvarez, this is compliance. We're requesting access to your original HACCP documentation. Our board has authorized an immediate audit of the recipe chain. Finally, I thought, proof has its day. I set my hand on the binder. Name the time. I'll bring it in. But before the ink on that invitation could dry, another call hit. Rachel. Her voice was tight, rehearsed. Dad listened carefully. There's no need to drag those old notebooks around. Corporate has already shifted production out of state. The FDA logs don't apply to current runs. An internal audit isn't necessary. Not necessary. My voice rose. People are getting sick, Rach. That's exactly when you go back to the original record. A pause. I imagined her pinching the bridge of her nose the way her mother used to when truth pressed too hard. Dad, please. If you show up waving that binder, you'll trigger liability exposure. Lawyers will have to disclose it. Everything gets messy. Let us handle this. I laughed once, bitter. Messy, Rachel, folks are breaking out in hives from jars with my name on them. It's already messy. She softened her tone like pouring sugar into bitter tea. Give us 10 days. We'll resolve it internally. Keep the binder out of sight until then. For everyone's sake. 10 days. A delay tactic if I'd ever heard one. I hung up without agreeing. That night, the local paper printed a headline that made my stomach twist: Founder's Silence Raises Questions. Below it, a blurry photo of me outside the church apron folded in my arms. The caption read, Alvarez declined to comment on safety allegations. Declined, no. I'd been muzzled by my own daughter. In the dark of my pickup cab, I opened the binder and traced my wife's handwriting in the margins. Trust your fire. They wanted delay. They wanted silence. But the coals inside me were burning steady, and I knew come the right spark I'd be ready to speak louder than they ever planned. 3 days later, the hammer fell. It was Friday evening, 7 o'clock sharp, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender, Heritage Foods Holdings, Treasury Division. The subject line chilled me before I even clicked notification of earnout suspension. I opened it. Plain words cold as steel. Effective immediately, all pending earnout payments related to Alvarez Kitchen Co. are suspended. Release of funds requires affidavit from original process owner, affirming compliance and continuity. Affidavit. Process owner. That meant me. Without my signature, the $15 million balance of Rachel's $35 million deal hung in limbo. Same hour, a second blow, the bank texted a fraud alert. Company accounts frozen pending investigation of safety complaints. Cards declined. Payroll stalled. I sat in the cab outside the church, watching dusk bleed into night. On my phone's social feed swarmed with the clip of Rachel smiling at the live stream, cutting me loose. Now the caption was crueler. Daughter of BBQ legend loses 15 million manslaughter over dad's refusal. At 10 o'clock, I walked into the fellowship hall. The choir was rehearsing. Between verses, I stretched out on a pew ledger under my arm like a shield. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel's face on that live stream, confident, untouchable, until tonight. By midnight, my photo hit the front page of the local paper, me sitting on the church steps apron, folded looking small against the stone columns. The headline stung worse than the frieze itself, legend left behind. Founder homeless as family fortune stalls. Humiliation had a taste. Bitter metallic like licking the rim of an old cast iron pot. I pressed the ledger tight against my chest and whispered to the rafters, they've taken my house. They've taken my name. Now they've taken her millions too. Maybe that's the only language she'll ever understand. And somewhere in the dark, I felt the fire steady itself. Not out, never out. Saturday morning broke with barbecue smoke drifting over Austin from backyard pits. The city was waking for the weekend. I was still on the church cot when my phone lit up. Caller ID Rachel. I let it buzz once, twice. On the third ring, I answered. Her voice, usually smooth as glass, was ragged. Dad, where are you where you left me? I said. There's a mistake, she rushed on. The bank froze the accounts. The earnout $15 million, it's locked until you sign the affidavit. They won't release a cent without you. Silence stretched. I could almost hear her pacing heels striking a hardwood floor that used to be mine. Dad, please. Just sign the paper. Confirm the process. Without your name, everything collapses. I leaned forward on the cot, elbows on knees. Everything collapses, or just the deal you chose over your father. Her breath hitched. Don't do this. You're angry. I get it. But if you don't sign, hundreds of employees lose jobs. Vendors go unpaid. Our whole reputation burns. I said, my voice low. You made sure I wasn't part of that hour. Remember, the line went quiet. For the first time, Rachel's polished certainty cracked. Dad, I need you. I looked at the ledger resting on the pew beside me. The weight of 40 years of smoke and sweat and signatures. The one thing they couldn't fake. When the world is watching, I said slowly, that's when we'll talk. Not in secret. Not in whispers. You wanted me erased on camera, now you'll ask for me back the same way. Dad, please find a stage, I told her. Bring the crowd. Then we'll see who's begging. I hung up my hands steady. The ledger lay open, my wife's notes dancing in the margins. And for the first time since she passed, I felt her nodding through the pages. The time was coming. Smoke doesn't hide forever, and this fire was about to roar. Sunday in Austin means music, smoke, and crowds. That weekend, the annual BBQ festival spread across Zilker Park, Like a carnival of fire pits, roaring bands, tuning reporters, weaving through the haze with cameras ready. I showed up at noon, apron folded under my arm, ledger tucked in a canvas bag. Folks recognized me quick. Some gave nods of respect, others whispered, "That's him, the one his own daughter cut loose." Phones rose, catching my every move. By mid-afternoon, Heritage Foods had set up a glossy booth. Corporate banners fluttered, handing out samples of the new recipe. But the crowd wasn't fooled. Word about the allergic reactions had spread. Plates landed in trash bins half full. Yelp reviews still smoldered. Then came the moment. Rachel stepped onto the main stage, red blazer, sharp against the smoky backdrop. Her voice trembled through the speakers. "We're committed to transparency, and today we're calling on our founder, Thomas Alvarez, to affirm our process so we can move forward together." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She was doing it publicly. The same daughter who'd cast me out on livestream now summoning me like a lifeline. People turned. Cameras found me. A path opened through the festival crowd. I climbed the stage steps, slow, deliberate, apron in hand. The sun caught the sweat on Rachel's face. Her eyes, red, desperate, met mine. "Dad," she said, voice cracking through the mic, "please. Without your signature, the deal falls apart. The 15 million is gone. Hundreds of jobs gone." The crowd went silent except for the hiss of smoke and the click of camera shutters. I held the apron high. "You wanted me erased on camera. Now before all these witnesses, you'll make it right." Her lips trembled. "What do you want?" I unfolded my list, voice steady, each word carrying like a sermon. "First, an apology. Here. Now. Public. Second, back pay for every worker you cut loose when you cashed your millions. Third, a seat as independent advisor for 5 years. Not a ghost. A presence. Fourth, a scholarship fund for young cooks paid from the earnout you tried to keep from me. And last, clear lines between family and business. You'll never weaponize my blood again." The crowd cheered, then hushed, waiting. Rachel's hands shook. She looked at the cameras, the people, the smoke rising like judgment. And then she did what pride swore she never would. She dropped to her knees, mic trembling in her hand. "Dad," she whispered, every word echoing across the park. "I'm sorry, I was wrong." The festival roared. Only then did I open the ledger, place my pen on the affidavit, and sign. The cameras caught every stroke. Smoke curled around us, sealing the moment in fire and ink. The Monday after the festival, Austin buzzed like a hive. Every news channel replayed the footage, Rachel kneeling before me, begging. Clips looped with bold captions, "Founder saves 35 million deal," and "Public humiliation at BBQ Fest." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt the weight of smoke in my chest, the kind that lingers after the pit's gone cold. Because I knew my daughter. Pride doesn't stay bent for long. By noon, I got my proof. A courier slid a thick envelope across my borrowed church table. Inside, a polished legal draft stamped Heritage Foods Holdings. It recited my conditions, the apology, the back pay, the scholarship fund, but watered them down until they read like corporate window dressing. Independent advisor had become honorary founder emeritus. No authority, no voice. Scholarship fund had been capped at pennies compared to what we'd agreed, and the apology buried in a press release nobody would read. I slammed the pages shut. This was no deal. It was camouflage. That night, a local blogger messaged me. "Mr. Alvarez, sources say Rachel's team is preparing a counter-narrative. They've hired a crisis firm to paint you as unstable. That public moment at the festival, they're calling it staged." Staged. My throat burned hotter than mesquite coal. The next morning, the Austin Chronicle ran an op-ed, "Did Alvarez exploit his daughter's misstep?" My photo sat beside Rachel's. Her expression serene, mine caught mid-shout. They were twisting the knife, turning my victory into suspicion. I opened the ledger, flipping to a page my wife had marked years ago. Her note in the margin read, "Truth wins slow, but it wins." I whispered to the empty fellowship hall. "Then we fight slow, paper for paper, fire for fire." Because if Rachel wanted to play games with stories, she'd forgotten one thing: my story had proof. Ink signatures, heat you could taste, and I was ready to light it. By midweek, the spiral tightened. Heritage Foods issued a gleaming statement across every outlet: founder and company aligned for the future. They quoted me words I'd never spoken about: unity, forgiveness, and transition. I stared at the release on my phone, jaw tight. They had taken my silence and forged it into surrender. The fallout came fast. Old friends messaged confused. Tom thought you stood your ground. Paper says you made peace. Vendors reached out asking if I'd signed away authority. Even the church ladies looked at me sideways as if I'd folded under the smoke. Meanwhile, Rachel's PR machine kept humming. Podcasts, LinkedIn posts, polished interviews. Resilient, young CEO navigates legacy conflict. She painted herself Survivor Me the Relic. But behind the curtain whispers told another story. Workers called me at night, hushed voices spilling through the line. Mr. Alvarez were 3 weeks late on paychecks. Another, they're cutting corners, worse than ever, swapping ingredients, rushing lines. The house of cards was swaying. Then the cruelest blow, a blogger unearthed footage of me sleeping in my truck outside the church. Head tilted, back apron draped across my chest. Headline, from pitmaster to pitiful founder, reduced to parking lot. The comments gutted me. Sad ending to a stubborn man. Should have retired gracefully. Rachel's right, he's liability. Humiliation poured over me thicker than any sauce. For a moment I felt the fire falter. Maybe they'd win after all. Bury me in shame, paint me as a bitter ghost. That night I drove out past the city lights, parked under the wide Texas sky, opened the ledger across the dash pages glowing in the dome light. Every line of my handwriting was a reminder this wasn't stubborn pride. It was truth, proven, certified. I ran my hand across my wife's note in the margin, hold steady. And I whispered into the empty night, they think I'm finished. But coals look coldest right before they spark. Because deep down I knew the spiral wasn't mine. It was Rachel's. And she was about to tumble headfirst into it. Saturday came with a sky as wide as a promise. Zilker Park filled again, this time not for music, but for the Austin Heritage BBQ cook-off, televised, sponsored, packed with half the city. The same cameras that had once filmed me being erased now pointed at the stage where Rachel stood red-eyed, trembling. The crowd buzzed, whispers like sparks. That's her, the one who threw her dad out. I stood near the back apron, folded ledger under my arm, not hiding, waiting. At 6 sharp, the MC called my name. Please welcome Thomas Alvarez, the man who started it all. The roar that followed wasn't polite. It was raw, hungry, angry. Phones rose like a forest. Rachel turned, saw me climbing the steps. Her voice cracked through the mic. Dad, please. Without your affidavit, the deal collapses. The 15 million is gone. Hundreds of jobs gone. She was shaking, mascara streaked. The queen of Polish brought low before her own people. I stepped up beside her, set the ledger on the podium. You wanted me erased on camera. Tonight you'll give me back my name on camera, and you'll do it by my terms. The crowd hushed. You could hear the hiss of smokers across the park. I raised a hand, counting off. 1A, public apology. Not in print. Here. Now. 2 back pay for every worker cut loose when you cashed your millions. 3A, seat as independent advisor, 5 years minimum. My voice, not just my name. 4A, scholarship fund for young cooks. Paid from the earnout you almost lost. And 5, family separate from business. No more weaponizing blood. Gasps, murmurs, cheers. Rachel's chest heaved, her pride fighting her desperation. Then in front of cameras, neighbors, and the very workers she'd shorted, she broke. She sank to her knees, microphone trembling in her hand. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting the brand, but I forgot who built it. Please, forgive me. The crowd erupted, cheers, whistles, applause rolling like thunder. I looked down at her, at the daughter who once stood on a milk crate to stir sauce with both hands. My voice carried steady. I'll sign, but not because you begged, because the truth is bigger than both of us. I bent, signed the affidavit across the ledger, my pen carving history into paper. The cameras caught every stroke. Smoke curled in the evening air, sealing the moment. And Rachel, powerful, untouchable Rachel, was on her knees before her father, begging for the fire she once tried to snuff out. The Monday papers carried it in bold: founder restores $35 deal at Festival Showdown. Photos showed Rachel on her knees, mascara streaked me steady with the ledger open. The city hummed with it on talk radio and coffee shops, even whispered in the pews. But victory didn't taste like sweet sauce. It tasted like ash. Within a week, Heritage Foods reshuffled its board. Compliance officers stepped in, monitors installed every corner of Alvarez Kitchen Co., placed under audit. Rachel was still CEO, but now with legal chains around her wrists, civil oversight fines, mandatory restitution. Evan kept his CFO title, but his signature power was stripped. They weren't dethroned, but they were shackled. I went home. Not to the big house, not to the marble counters Rachel once flaunted. I bought a small bungalow on the east side. One-story porch swing backyard just big enough for a smoker, a place with no cameras. By spring, I'd started a small program teaching neighborhood kids food safety and fire control. They leaned over notebooks, scribbling temps and times while the smell of hickory drifted over the fence. I told them BBQ is patience and respect. Rush it and you poison people. Do it right and you feed a city. One afternoon, as I chalked a diagram of safe cooking zones, I saw her, Rachel, standing outside the fence, not in a blazer, not on a stage, just a daughter in jeans watching. She didn't speak, didn't come closer. She listened to my words like a student too shy to ask a question. I let her stand there. No invitation, no banishment, just truth. Because family isn't blood, it's trust, and she'd burn that bridge herself. I turned back to the kids, lifted my chalk, and said, Lesson 1, fire doesn't forgive. You respect it, or it teaches you the hard way. The coals hissed, flared, and settled. I smiled at the class, apron tied tight, ledger safe at home. I wasn't erased. I wasn't liability. I was firekeeper again. And this time the flame was mine alone. Summer heat pressed down like a lid, but in my little backyard the fire was mine again. Not corporate fire, not staged for live streams, just mesquite logs, honest smoke, and a circle of folding chairs where kids leaned forward with notebooks. I called it the firekeeper class. Word spread fast. Neighbors sent their teenagers, church folks dropped by, even a few laid off. Alvarez kitchen workers came to sit at the edge, curious. We weren't bottling sauce for millions. We were learning patience, trust, safety. One boy, Marcus, raised his hand. Mr. Alvarez, why do we gotta log the temps if we already know the meat's cooked? I held up the ledger pages, worn soft. Because memory fades. Paper doesn't. Truth written down keeps you honest when someone doubts your word. The kids nodded, scribbling. Somewhere deep, I felt my wife smile. Meanwhile, the news kept circling Rachel. Heritage Foods Board announced penalties, fines for safety lapses, restitution for late wages, quarterly oversight reports. Every headline carried her name next to mine, though in very different lights. One evening, Pastor Jim stopped by, leaning on the fence. Tom, you're becoming a local hero. Elder groups, food safety advocates, they all quote your story. Did you ever think it'd come to this? I wiped my hands on my apron. Never thought my daughter would push me out of my own kitchen either. Life burns the way it wants. He chuckled. Maybe, but you've turned the ashes into kindling. That night I sat on the porch swing, ledger in my lap. I flipped to a blank page, uncapped my pen, and wrote, Lesson for tomorrow, fire teaches consequences. Smoke remembers everything. Out front, headlights slowed. Rachel's car. She didn't come in, didn't knock. Just sat a moment at the curb, then drove away. I closed the ledger, steady. Some fires you welcome close. Some you let pass in the night. Either way, I was keeping the pit lit. By September, my story had gone farther than I ever carried a jar of sauce. Local news gave way to podcasts, then to national coverage. Headlines framed me as the father who saved a fortune or the pitmaster who fought back. One afternoon, a producer from public radio showed up with a recorder. She asked if I'd share what it felt like standing on that festival stage with my daughter on her knees. I thought about it long before answering. It felt heavy, I said finally. Not proud, not victorious. Heavy, like carrying 40 years of firewood all at once. The interview aired the next week. Folks stopped me on the street, pressed my hand at church, even sent letters, seniors, thanking me for proving they weren't invisible parents, warning their kids about respect. My little story had become a mirror for theirs. Meanwhile, Rachel's spiral deepened. Every podcast that praised me seemed to sharpen the knives for her. Crisis consultants coached her lines, but the public wasn't buying. Too polished, too late. She was the face of greed, and no amount of lipstick sweetened the taste. One night as I locked up after a class, I found a letter slipped under my door. Rachel's handwriting sharp and slanted. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't breathe under the weight of what I did. I thought I was building a brand. Instead, I broke us. I am sorry. I read it twice. The fire inside me didn't flare, it cooled. I folded the paper, set it between the ledger's pages, and left it there, a record like any other entry. The next Sunday, the pastor asked me to speak. The congregation leaned in as I stood at the pulpit apron, draped over one arm. I'm not here to talk about millions, I told them. I'm here to remind you that silence lets lies spread like smoke. If your name matters, protect it. If your story matters, write it down. Fire remembers, but so must we. Applause rose long and steady, and in the last pew I saw her. Rachel, head bowed, hands clasped. Not on a stage, not in control. Just a daughter in the shadows listening. For the first time, I let myself hope she'd heard me. Not as a CEO, not as a brand, but as my child. October cooled the air, but the fire in my pit still roared. My backyard classes grew each week, kids scribbling notes, laid-off workers returning to the rhythm of smoke and patience. Folks began calling me Coach Tom, though I never asked for the title. Then one evening, as the coals hissed low, a knock sounded on my porch. It was Evan. No cameras, no blazer, just a man with shadows under his eyes. Tom, he said, voice low. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. You lost that right when you tried to gag me with contracts. He shifted uneasy. This isn't about contracts, it's about people. Heritage is under federal review. Investigators are digging deeper than Rachel ever expected. If they find irregularities sourcing accounting, it won't stop at fines. It could mean prison. I studied him in the porch light. And you came to warn me out of kindness? He shook his head. Self-preservation. If the company collapses, everyone points at me. But they'll drag you into it too. Founder's name is still on every jar. The warning rang true. I'd tasted the edge of their blades before. Evan, I said slowly, you built walls of paper and thought fire wouldn't climb them. Now you're choking on smoke. That's not my doing. He stepped closer. Just be careful. The higher the blaze, the faster reputations burn. I let him walk away without another word. That night I sat at my kitchen table, ledger open. Beside my wife's old note, trust your fire. I added my own line. Fire doesn't just feed, it warns. Ignore it and it devours. The next day, a letter arrived from the state attorney's office, a formal invitation to testify about Alvarez Kitchen Co.'s practices. I set the paper on top of the ledger, felt the weight of both. They thought they'd erased me. Now the law itself was asking for my story. The embers weren't just glowing anymore. They were ready to spark into a blaze no one could put out. November skies hung low gray as cooled ash. The summons to testify sat folded in my pocket like a hot coal I couldn't set down. Heritage Foods was cracking audits, subpoenas, stories leaking daily. Rachel's face showed up on news tickers, not as rising CEO, but as executive under review. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed plain. Clean shirt, pressed slacks, apron folded neatly into my bag. Not as costume, just as reminder. My wife's stitches still strong, her thread still holding me together. The courthouse buzzed with cameras. Reporters shouted flashes, popped microphones angled like spears. Mr. Alvarez, do you blame your daughter? Do you want her punished? Is the brand finished? I gave them nothing but a steady look. Some fires don't need more air. Inside, I laid the ledger on the witness table. 40 years of smoke and signatures. Every page said more than my mouth could. When the attorney asked if I was the origin, I placed my hand on the cover. Yes, I said, and the fire doesn't lie. The room went still. Judges leaned in, pens scratched. Rachel sat across the aisle, pale eyes red, staring at the wood grain instead of me. When it ended, I walked outside into crisp air. Reporters surged, but I raised a hand. The only story worth telling is written here, I said it, holding up the ledger. Don't forget it. Weeks later, the verdict came. Heritage fined leadership stripped. Rachel barred from holding an executive role for 5 years. Evan facing charges of his own. The company survived, but under new hands, new rules. Me, I went back to my little house, my pit, my porch swing. Classes grew bigger. Young cooks, retired neighbors, even strangers who'd heard my name on the radio. They gathered around the fire notebooks, open eyes wide. That evening, as the coals glowed steady, I told them, Lesson 1: family is more than blood. Family are the ones who guard your fire when you're too tired to tend it. Lesson 2: silence isn't dignity when truth is at stake. Speak even if your voice shakes. And lesson 3: fire doesn't forgive shortcuts. It remembers. Always. The kids scribbled, the neighbors nodded. Behind the fence, I saw Rachel again watching, not speaking, her face softer than before. Maybe someday she'd step closer. Maybe not. I tied on my apron, lifted the lid, and let the smoke rise into the night. Not bitter, not broken. Just a man who kept the flame. The last lesson wasn't about barbecue. It was about living. And as long as I breathed, I would not be erased.